Good morning. Welcome everyone to this event. It's a public debate about different types of doing research, inductive or deductive. And the persons who are going to do that is Professor Andy Lowe and Professor Mike Saran. And this event will be chaired by Professor Romeo Turkan. And he will also give a short introduction of the context of this event. It's the third year we have this. It's a cooperation between Halmstad University, Aalborg University, and Oulu University. So and this is a part of a PhD course, and it's also open for other PhD students. But I will give the microphone to Romeo, who will continue this event and share it, and good luck and have a good time.
Thank you, Svante, thank you. Svante is a bit modest, and indeed there's a lot of work has been put into this PhD course, and somewhere we have Michael Lusek, who is running around probably still doing something work for us, so that's a big help, and many thanks. So the title of today's presentation is The Data Before Theory or Theory Before Data. And the subtitle is Which is more appropriate for PhD research in management. And this, as Svante said, this course or this public debate is part of a larger cooperation, and here we have an audience, our students, PhD students, who are taking part in a one-week PhD course on theory building and theorizing. And I think I have here a link to our website. So this is the website where you can learn more about our PhD course. And our students here participate in the course for 1 week, and we have a pleasure to, as part of our initial arrangements when we started back 3 years now, to have half a day open to public so that we can share our experience and knowledge also with the faculty at the university that hosts the event, but also outside the university. And clearly the School of Business Engineering and Science at Halmstad University is organizing and supporting this event, so they do for the PhD course. I come from Aalborg University, and together with Svante and our colleagues from Oulu University, we co-coordinate this the PhD course and this public debate. And I'm in the middle as a chair, so the debate is going to take place. So they asked me what I want to see. They said, well, let me sit in the middle just in case we start fighting and disagreeing on the issues. Professor Michael Saran is from Leicester University, United Kingdom. Michael is passionate about marketing theory, especially challenging it quite a lot. And his words are rethinking marketing, that this is what he's been quite a lot external examiner and supervisor of PhD students, including Sweden. I'm sure before coming to the debate you saw the more detailed information about their biography and achievements. On my right side, Dr. Andy Lowe. Andy is a fellow of Grounded Theory Institute in California. Andy is passionate about PhD supervision, never mind research, but also, in his words, demystifying PhD research process. Later on, you have questions about this, you can ask later on. And I must say that I had a privilege to meet both of them while I was studying, doing my master thesis and PhD studies back at Strathclyde in Glasgow. So it's nice to be together again and do useful things for new generation. Now the debate format is going to be as follows. This is 10 minutes introduction, so almost on time. And before we proceed, we'd like to vote. And so I'd like to raise your hands we have two motions. One motion is data before theory. The other motion is theory before data. So I'd like to vote who is for the first motion, which is data before theory. So just keep it there. I'll count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. Okay, so 10. So 10, I'll put this data before theory. Now, theory before data. Theory before 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17.
Do you have a third option?
Yeah, don't know. Don't know.
Well, it depends. That's my option.
Well, okay. Yeah, we'll put this don't know at the moment.
Can we have a recount, please?
Okay, so it depends. Well, we'll come back to this discussion when we'll have opportunity to do that. Then each speaker will have 10 minutes to present their case. So Andy will argue for data before theory case, and Michael will argue theory before data case. Then we'll have more or less half an hour for Q&A, during which you'll be able to address the questions or concerns about, or it depends, or don't know, or if you have doubts about your positions, or any other questions you may want to ask. And then after that, in reverse order, Michael will start with closing, 5 minutes statements, and Andy will conclude with 5 minutes. And then we'll do the voting again towards the end, and we'll have concluding remarks. So without any further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Andy. You have your own mic, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Gomorrah, you can hear? Okay. Okay, today you have a very clear choice. If you vote for Mike, you have to seriously believe that a sensible research strategy in management research is to first have a guess and then check to see whether your guess is okay or not, if you really want to do that. Sometimes this is called deduction. I hold the view that that's not very sensible, and it's much better to find out what's really going on. No guessing, please. Let's just find out. That's called induction. So in the first 10 minutes, I'm going to explain why you should disregard Mike's perspective entirely. And after a conversation, I will have 5 minutes saying why you should take the particular orientation I am mentioning. So there are 4 reasons why I think this kind of deductive approach in the context of management research is inappropriate. First of all, it's to do with the nature of managerial work. It's very distinctive, does not lend itself to a deductive research paradigm. The second reason is that deductive research methods are always focused on the professional concerns of the academic research community rather than with the people they are actually researching. It's a very arrogant posture if you think about it. The third point is that most deductive research in management has delivered myths rather than empirically robust insights. And the problem with myths is that they don't have to be true to be believed. The fourth thing is that the deductive research method are now such a dominant research paradigm that it's created some unintended negative consequences across the entire research firmament. Okay, why is management research so distinctive? First of all, being a manager, half my working life I was a manager, what you do is eclectic. In other words, one day is very different from the next day. 1 minute is different from the next day. It's not a normal situation. The other aspect of being a manager is managers, by definition, are very busy, powerful people. And if you stick questionnaires under their nose, they'll show you where the door is. It's insulting. The third point in this aspect is that management requires both thought and action, and they're working in an environment of great variability. And an important aspect of management activity is that management do what is called the proper line. Let me explain. It's like this. Truth is stranger than fiction, and yet fiction rules the world. To quote Barney Glaser in his Stanford University address, he said, "Fictions are built into and are part of vested social structures. Thus, socially vested structures are a formal requirement of a formal organization and social life. The effect of these fictions is often to lead to a miss of what's really going on in the social arena by deductive research. Thus, these fictions usually lead to preconceived professional problems to do research on that don't exist." So academics are researching things which are fantasy. They do not exist. To take this matter further, so the proper line, managers are programmed to deliver the proper line. This is the institutionalization of fiction as a means of perpetuating reality. And what are these fictions? Well, there are many. I'll just very briefly mention 5. There's the myth of consumer sovereignty. There's the myth that relationship marketing is a benign win-win situation. There's a myth that universal banks are full of probity and customer focus. There's a myth that corporates really do care about society, and there's a myth that mergers exist. They don't exist. They are all takeovers. So let's have a look at consumer sovereignty. Over 50 years ago, Kenneth Galbraith, the famous economist, had this to say. He said, "There is always a presumption of consumer sovereignty in the market economy. The unidirectional flow of instruction from consumer to market to producer. This sequence no longer holds. The mature corporation readily has at hand the means of controlling the prices at which it sells as well as those at which it buys. Similarly, it has the means of managing what the customer buys at the prices at which it controls." So, the customer is king. I don't think so. Let's look at relationship marketing. This is has roots in Scandinavia. Grönroos in Helsinki and Evert Gummerson in Stockholm and others are great champions of this myth. And actually, the idea of relationship marketing is that we, the company, really care about our customers. So let's have a nice, cozy relationship. Wrong. What they are doing is what I call pseudo-friending, which is the deliberate nurturing of friendship to create client loyalty, and by so doing, to anesthetize them from opportunistic behavior. So what you want to do is close down their options, not open them up. I haven't got time to go into the myths, so we can take questions on those later. So what are the unintended consequences of the overuse of the deductive paradigm in management research? Well, one of the first and major ones is the increase of prejudice and myopia amongst academic gatekeepers who are editors of magazines. Mike is also an editor of a magazine. Many academics who do research into management are more interested in the application of their favorite methodology rather than understanding what is really going on in the research context. Academics are more concerned with gaining status and recognition than discovering the main concerns of the people they are actually researching. Deductive research gives the appearance of being very scientific and sophisticated, whilst in reality, much of it is merely following simple procedures which look more complex and profound than they really are. So what happens when a single research paradigm becomes too dominant? I've already mentioned myopic research perspective. Secondly, there is a universal imposition of deductive research criteria across a range of research methodologies which impact both on the entry to peer-reviewed academic journals and the supervision of PhD scholars. There is a greater disjuncture between academic research community and management practitioners. All over the academic universe, researchers in management research are researching irrelevant things that are meaningless to those who are actually managers. Failure to acknowledge that socially vested fictions that are a functional requirement of a formal organization misses the whole picture. So I hope you will agree by voting later that a deductive research paradigm in the context of management research is highly inappropriate. In the final 5 minutes of my presentation at the end of this session, I will explain the alternative and why it is so much better. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Andy. Now, the floor to Mike to respond.
Well, good morning, everybody. Andy has very articulately explained there are many, many myths in management research, and he's illustrated a couple of them. I don't disagree that there are many myths in management research, and even that most management is based on myths. But if we're going to investigate these myths, if we're going to interrogate these myths and reveal these myths, we need theory before we gather the data. Andy said that we should find out what's going on before we develop theory. But we need theory in order to know what to look for. We need theory before we gather the data. And there's 5 principal reasons why I think this is the case. Let me explain. Firstly, in any research, not just management research, the terms, constructs, definitions, phenomenon, all these constructs terms which have to be investigated have some roots in semantic or linguistic meaning. And the conventions about what any term means, consumers, sovereignty, management, there are conventions within any discipline, any academic discipline, which determine what those agreed definitions are, even if they argue about precise detail. And those definitions are contained in existing theory, in existing literature. The second reason why you need the theory first is because existing theories on a subject provide the basis for the questions which you're going to investigate. Even saying that management is based on myths is a sort of theory. So you have to have some preconception, something that either you have to refute or to question or to look for gaps or questions that have not been asked or methodologies to investigate them, all of which are based in existing theories of some sort or another. So you have to have that grounding in the theory before you can develop the questions for to be investigated. The third reason is because PhDs in particular are expected to frame their work, their research work, within an existing body of knowledge. You can't just say, I've invented a new subject, give me a PhD. You have to frame it in relation to the existing body of knowledge in some way, a discipline, an area, a field, a school of thought. And all these things consist, at the end of the day, as a set of theories. All those first three arguments lead to a fourth point, which is that all of them require a basis of research as literature from literature on the topic. You have to look at the literature on the topic and what other people have done before you investigate yourself, even if you are trying to refute everything that everybody has said previously. Our own research stands on the shoulders of giants, Newton said. It's only the previous work that we can build on. It would be very arrogant to say, I'm inventing it all afresh myself. The fifth reason why you have to have the theory before the data is because the constructs employed in the study, the methodology, the epistemology, the understanding of what you can find out, what is find-outable, a whole number of things we cannot see, we cannot identify. To know what these things are from the beginning, you have to have some sort of philosophical and theoretical underpinning, or else you're just running around gathering loads of data and not knowing what to do with it, and not knowing what it's for. So all of the constructs that one's investigating in any study assume some underlying philosophy or theory. So any research design, particularly in an applied subject like management, cannot escape theory. And fundamentally, we need theory in order to understand what data to look for. Theory has to precede data collection. This doesn't mean that I'm arguing for positivism, for testing of theories, for refutational Karl Popperian type of logical positivism, or any of these particular philosophical approaches to science. Even the most qualitative, interpretative, social research investigation has to begin with theory, and management is often research of that type and must begin with theory too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have, almost on time, so now we have time for questions. I just need to stand up and give the microphone so that our colleagues can record the question.
Can I just say something before?
Okay.
Oh, no, I can use this one. Okay, sorry. Is it on? Yeah? Heter bra? Yes, can you hear? Oh, well. Microphone, thanks. I would just like to clarify a misconception that Mike, I'm sure, inadvertently has said. When you do inductive research, of course you relate it to a body of knowledge, but you do it after you have found the thing that you didn't know about before. You then try and situate that which you have found within existing knowledge. It doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Want to respond to that? No? Okay. So, yes.
I think it's a bit hard to counter-argue both of you because you have very good arguments. And that's what I mean. What I mean is that it must sort of also depend on where we are in a process, doesn't it? I mean, it could be useful to try to go in with open eyes, even though you have some kind of thoughts in your head already, and that's also a kind of theory that you sort of bring in. And then you go in and try to look at things with new eyes, and then I mean, a next step could be that you situate it within the research context, and then you sort of work deductively after that. And that, from that point of view, I mean that it depends on where you are.
Yes, if I could respond to that, it's a good point, and you're quite right, it's an iterative process. But given the motion we have before us, I think it could be misleading to give the impression you can just go out and gather data afresh without having some sort of preconceptions based on theory in your head, partly because of the way in which you gather data, what you look for, what are counted as data, all have to be based on some sort of theoretical, philosophical framing. And if you start saying, well, I'm going to try not to do that and look at things completely afresh, you're sort of denying that you have some sort of ideas in your head, and that gives the wrong impression, and I think can lead to errors in the data that you do collect. Quite apart from the fact nowadays, information technology enables us to gather so much data. Part of the problem, particularly in management research, and certainly for companies who have to manage data, is there's too much of it. How do you analyze it? How do you collect it all? What do you do with it? Even the security services have this problem. And what is needed is some sort of, you need to have some sort of theoretical aim and objective in order to begin even to analyze it and collect it in the first place. So I think you have to accept that you need some framing first, even if you then try and move away from that and look at it afresh once you've gathered the data.
And you would like to respond?
I'm not sure if the mic's working. Is it working? It is not working. Yeah, okay. Thanks. When you do a purely piece of inductive research, there are strategies that you can adopt to mitigate the contamination of your preconceptions. One of them is rather unorthodox. You can actually do research in areas about which you know absolutely nothing. This does not sit easy with university bureaucracies for obvious reasons. But if you don't really know much about a subject, you are at the eyes and ears of a naive child, and you are absolutely no threat to the people you're researching once they realize you know nothing anyway. If you are compelled to do research in an area where you have some prior experience or even some expertise, there are strategies called pre-understanding where you consciously write about that which you think you know before you begin, so you can suspend your prejudices. You can never eliminate them. But the nub of this debate, from my perspective at least, is which is more important, the main concern of the people you're researching or the main concern of the professional research community.
Perhaps, would it be all right if I ask for an example? I work for a company, and I'm a little bit interested in what would happen if our company was purchased by a larger organization, or if our company bought a smaller one, a merger, so to speak. In such a situation, I'm curious about whether both would come out winners or not. Would an inductive approach or a deductive approach, which of those two would be more suitable to investigate something like that?
Okay. Can I go first? Sure. Well, the myth of merger is perpetuated by the banking and accounting community because they can get fat fees for having mergers. Mergers never happen. They are always takeovers. They are always victims. They're always people who succeed. And the thing in terms of, it's difficult to do research in a dynamic situation where something's actually happening, but it's possible. I think the important thing is that because of the research that I have done on this, you could read my paper and then you could find that the core variable I have elucidated will be able to tell you in advance whether your company was going to be in the ascendancy or the descendancy. Because had I done research in mergers following the conventional wisdom using a deductive research situation, I would have never have found that out. And so that in that situation is something to do. As it says on my background, I'm a fellow of the Grounded Theory Research Institute, which believes and follows the logic that all things should evolve from the data. And everything is data. The data is not something that's parameterized by the researcher. Everything is data.
Just a second, just to respond to.
I think I'm okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Yes, a good question. Mergers and acquisitions. It's often said there's no such thing as mergers, there only are acquisitions. But I thought Andy disproved his own point by beginning his answer by saying precisely that mergers are of a certain type. And this is what mergers are, not the way they normally are viewed. Yeah. Well, that is a theory. That's a presupposition about what mergers are. You have to have a definition of what a merger is and what all these constructs are before you begin to design whether it's inductive or deductive, if you see what I mean. Therefore, there has to be some underlying theory in the first place. And to say, well, it can be purely inductive, I don't know what data you would gather. Everything?
Well, I can reply while you're handing the microphone to that guy in the audience. It's like this. Before I did the research, the conventional wisdom, the deductive logic, if you will, was that mergers happen. I approve they do not. They have never happened. They're always takeovers. Mm-hmm. Okay? And this was, I'm not a merger expert before I did it. I knew nothing about them. I thought I'll just see what happened, and that is what emerged. So the theory emerged from the data.
Well, I disagree, because I think that even the concept of merger has to be based in some sort of theory about how businesses work, what businesses are, how they come together,
I don't
what is the
accept
business.
the theory of merger.
But by using the
it
term
doesn't
itself,
exist.
that isn't based in the theory of business.
Well, it's a wrong view.
Maybe it's wrong, but that's not the point. The point is, how do you investigate it?
Well, if you want to live and inhabit and encourage the world of fantasy, carry on.
Well, I think it's you that's in the fantasy world, not me.
Really? I was the one that was able to retire early by selling my ideas to a company in Texas based on this research in Finland.
Well, I won't lower the tone of the debate by
well, I'm
being
just
personal.
giving you some facts here.
But Andy, in continuation of what you are saying here, it's a funny discussion, because what you are saying is that there are data which are lying around here. But this is ridiculous. Yeah? There are no data lying around us. Data are constructions, and we are part in this construction. And this is self-evident, and you can see it everywhere. Even in the grounded theory, you are constructing your data.
Well, grounded theory is based on discovering the main concern of the people you are researching, not the main concern of the research community, not the main concern of the particular researcher. And you have no idea what you will discover before you start. None at all.
No, but are data lying around here? But what you are saying is data lying around here. You have to gather data.
Well, what's your definition of data? What's your definition of...
I'm asking you. Tell me what data are.
Okay, anything's data. Silence is data.
Yes.
Numbers, words, body language, it's all data.
Yes. And how can you say that we are not looking at let's say, body language, or we are doing something else, watching what you are doing, or listening what you are saying, and so this is a choice of us, and we are part in this construction of the data, because otherwise this body language wouldn't be anything else than something which is not happening together in a coherent picture.
But the deductivist is a victim of his own hypothesis. You have decided before you do anything that this concept is either there or it's not there. You refute it or you substantiate it. So what happens if you discover things that are not on your hypothesis? Do you ignore them? An inconvenient truth?
Well, as you know, as you can guess, I must agree that data is our own construction, and it's not always about people either. I mean, even the assumption that data is about people. A lot of data on sustainability and so on requires data about the environment, about animals, about other things. You already, in many of your statements, Andy, have assumed data is about the people. Well, it doesn't just come from people, but your assumption of that is based on your theoretical framing of what you regard as data.
I'm saying everything's data.
Well, everything's data and nothing's data then, because you have to have some theories in order to make any sense of it whatsoever, to
Let
know
it
what they are.
emerge. Trust in emergence.
Okay, my question is, what kind of use can we make from the generalizing our results? I understand that in deductive research we get results and then we probably review them in the further studies and try to refine our theory. And if in the inductive research we always compare our results only later on with the existing results, it means that this is a mosaic which never mixes together. So we anyway every time start afresh. So why do we need to have certain generalization of our results then?
Do you want to go first?
I can go first.
Okay.
Well, generalization strikes me as a slightly different question. How you generalize from any result is problematic. I'm not saying that inductive research requires universalizability of results or data or theories. You can have very, very small scale investigations about and very tightly pack what it is you're investigating in order to find out what's going on, and then a broader study, a broader survey to see if the same thing applies in different countries and different cultures or in other companies or whatever it is. So generalizability often requires further study, but I still say in order to produce the building blocks and the framework for what it is you are studying, that has to be built on some underlying theories or assumptions. Even if you're trying to prove they're all myths and they're all wrong, you still need them in the first place before you even know what data is, what data are, and how to gather them.
I would take a slightly different view. Surprise, surprise.
There's a shock.
And generalization can come in many flavors. And with the kind of research that I do, the type of generalization you have is what's called conceptual generalization. And so take the instance of nurses. Around the world, in Sweden or Bangladesh, the relative pay of nurses to the rest of the blue-collar worker community is pretty low. So why is it that around the world, nurses are not paid, not remunerated in a way which reflects the true value of their work? And research was done in Japan and elsewhere, and it was found that it's the nurse's own fault. Because what nurses do is what's called disavowal. In other words, when a patient recovers, the nurse will say, oh, the patient presented well. They have such a robust body, they recovered. Or, very good doctor. Or, these drugs are wonderful. They edit out their contribution through tender loving care and what have you to that. Now, this kind of thing would never, ever, you couldn't possibly guess that in advance. And the point of the kind of work I do with people is that there are assumptions you make, and one of the main assumptions is that the nature of the human condition is universal. Fear, love, hate, betrayal, whatever, are emotions we all understand wherever we come from. And so what we're trying to look for are transcendent qualities which can start in one particular location and explain behavior in others. This is a kind of conceptual generalization.
Shall we proceed with the closing statements then?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so now I think...
Oh, sorry, I beg your
think I
pardon.
go
I beg your
first.
pardon, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I still think it's very interesting, this. But I mean, it must have a lot to do with age also. Because I remember when I did my first round as a PhD, it was very much easier to go in with less preconceptions as it is now and see things. So I mean, during time, I mean, you sort of get stuck in the ways of seeing things. So what's your view on that?
Sorry, can I just clarify what you mean? It was easier previously to have fewer preconceptions.
Yeah.
You could be more free to what you look at. In management research, I take it.
And I remember my previous professor said that it's when you are a PhD, that's when you really can discover new things.
Yeah, oh yes, I quite agree with that. I mean, I've done nothing useful really since I did my PhD. I've only gone downhill since then. But there's some truth in that it's the one time in your research career that you're free to look at everything. You've got more time. You don't have all the pressures of, dare I say it, university administration and teaching and other things you have to do in the academic world. And you have to do the work on your own. And the PhD exam tests partly whether you did the work on your own. These ideas and the development of knowledge is yours. Whereas after that, a lot of the work I've done has been with other people. You can put teams together. You can get an expert in the team to add. You can't do that as a PhD. You have to do it pretty much all yourself. So that's a lot of weight of responsibility. But in a way, it's a freedom as well, that you can choose where to go. And one of the questions I ask in PhD exams is whether the study that you have ended up with, the results that you found, are the same as you set out to answer. And if they say yes, I'm always rather worried, because I think, well, if you haven't actually changed the question as you've gone along the PhD, then you haven't really learned anything. You haven't really done a PhD. So of course it has to develop. You have to have the freedom to change tack, or even to turn the PhD on its head. But I don't really think that's got anything to do with the inductive, deductive debate. That's a question of academic freedom, which I would agree with. But I would have thought that could be true on either side of this particular debate.
A final question then regarding the PhD study as students are going through. Which, if we followed the deductive or the inductive approach, which of those two do you think would help us complete our PhD study the quickest?
Okay. Can I say something about that? Okay. One of the passions I have is I'm a visiting academic in Asia, America, and elsewhere. And even within the same department in the same city, there is a difference about a view about what a PhD is. You'll find that people in the next department have a totally different understanding of what it is. And one of the reasons why people make problems for themselves as a PhD researcher is they don't do due diligence. Before you sign up to do a PhD, you've really got to understand what it is that university, that department believes a PhD is. And if they give you some kind of bureaucratic academic speak, well, you say, okay, will you please hand me a copy of the letter of appointment that you send to external examiners, which specify the very detailed criteria against which this degree is awarded or not. And if they say no, then, well, that tells you quite a bit about the culture of that situation. The deeper you get into a PhD, the more difficult it is to extract yourself from it. And I've seen some appalling treatment of PhD researchers around the world, and some good stuff, but mainly bad. And so it should be a negotiated contract, that you know what the end result, what the end criteria is, that you know what the major milestones should be. You should be able to ask what are the stages throughout the PhD process when my performance will be evaluated, and what are the criteria for my progress or lack of progress. And one of the reasons why this often doesn't happen is that many academics never receive any training or even recognition for the hours and effort they put into research supervision. In many places, it's not considered important as other kinds of activities. And so at my last post, I was able to slowly introduce what I call a PhD supervisor mentoring program, where inexperienced academics were partnered with more experienced ones, and that everybody learned through the process. So you really have to understand what it is you're taking on. In some research communities, in the ideal situation for me, a PhD would be a process which achieves the intellectual autonomy of the researcher, so that having got the PhD, that person is confident, competent, and someone who knows about research. And I believe the actual data that you do in your PhD, for most people, will become less relevant the days after you've completed your PhD, because I believe the process is far more important than whatever end result you have. That's only my particular point of view. And the PhD itself is a German invention, and it started with very good motives and was copied around the world, but unfortunately Germany has now got one of the worst PhD systems on the planet, where there's probably the least degree of academic freedom, and it's in a sorry state. But you should investigate before you sign up, well, what does this actually mean? What is the process here? What does it mean? And I'd be surprised, even in this university, if every department says, we agree it's this. I don't think they will.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with Andy about some of his comments about the good points and things to be careful of in the PhD process. I wouldn't be so harsh on Germany, but largely I agree with what you say there. But I thought I might go back to the question, if I may, which was about how you best ensure that you achieve the PhD most quickly.
Okay.
And I don't think speed is necessarily the key variable here, the key desired outcome. I know it is for you. You all want to finish, as those who are doing PhDs, as quickly as possible. But it's more important to do the process well and what time it takes. And I'll give you an example, which is the pop group Queen. Anybody heard of Queen? I know it's an old generation, but that's the point. Brian May, the guitarist in Queen, left his studies, his PhD studies at University College London in quantum physics in whenever it was, 1972 or something, in order to become an international rock star in the pop group Queen. And 35 years later, he went back to finish his PhD at University College London, because obviously, for some reason, in his mind, he had not finished the study that he set out to do. It was rudely interrupted by international pop stardom and infinite wealth. Nevertheless, the PhD was the important thing. Not the time it took for him, but the fact that he got it in the end. So I'd still say, time isn't the most important thing. And to answer the other part of your question, Mikael, of course, for certain other subjects other than management, of course, you might, depending what the study is, you may use inductive or deductive. It depends what the question is and what the theoretical context is of the study. But in management, I would argue, because it is so diffuse and covers so many different academic disciplines, are informed by them, sociology, economics, psychology, and so on, that all the more you need to be very careful to be clear what the theoretical grounding is before you begin the empirical data collection.
So with inductive research, you don't have that problem, because you don't go anywhere near the library until you have found something. Because one of the great time wasters of a PhD in the early stages is wondering what the hell to read and what not to read. And you don't have that problem. So you generate the data, you synthesize, you analyze it, you get the core variable and say, oh, this is fine. Let's go and see what other people have found on this issue. And this short-circuits the process in that particular way. I agree with Mike, time is not the most important thing, but you can spend more time making a rigorous comparative literature discursive review than just jumping in the dark about something. But one of the things that I'll digress. I'll shut up. I'm going off the point. Sorry, the chairman's disappearing. Okay.
Yes. Thanks for the wonderful debate. I need just a clarification concerning the example Andy gave concerning conceptualization of the nursing issue in Japan. Now, if I want to study this similar phenomenon in Ghana, do I have to go with a background as a conceptual grounding or as a theory to guide me to study this similar phenomenon in Ghana?
Okay, there is no such thing, stepping aside from this debate, as a good method and a bad method. Whatever research method you decide to use, the important thing is to stay with the tenets of that method and stay within that method. Take the good and the bad and process it.
Now, my question is it you have to go as a conceptualization of what you found in Japan to guide me, or do I have to go to using that as a theory to guide me to do the research, not a methodology, but...
Well, I mean, you're an independent, autonomous researcher. You decide what the focus of your own research is. And once you've decided that, you choose the method which is appropriate for it. So it depends on what method you choose. This inductive method doesn't tell people what to do or what not to do.
Andy, let me clarify. I think the question is, you said that category emerged in Japan from the research on nurses.
Yeah, yeah.
Over, what do you call it? Over, what is the title?
Conceptual generalization.
Yeah, conceptual generalization. So you found that core category in Japan on nurses. Now, the question is, if the researcher would like to research the same phenomenon in Ghana on nurses, would they use that category to go into the field?
Well, first, if you wanted to find what Ghanaian nurses believe, do, act, and feel, there's two ways of doing it. You could start with a hypothesis based on this grounded theory, or you could say, well, I'm just going to go and find out. And then when you found out, you could retrospectively compare it.
I think we'll proceed with the closing statements. I give 5 minutes.
Well, I think my closing statement would begin by re-emphasising that I think the questions and the discussion we've had in the debate has really just reiterated much of the same points that I made at the beginning, that you need the theory in order to define the data that are going to be collected, decide which ones to collect, to decide how to collect them. As one of the audience indicated, who has now left, which is one of my votes having gone, said the data are a social construction. They are not out there. They are a social construction that we invent. What are data today? One of you mentioned the time aspect. What would have been counted as data even 20 years ago, certainly 50 years ago, in management research, have been developed and changed nowadays. What we look at and what we regard as management research has changed as well. The fundamental point is that you cannot go into any research, and certainly not management research, with a tabula rasa, with a blank slate. You have preconceptions and theories in your head. And secondly, the motion refers to PhD research in particular. And there it is even more important, I think, that the researcher makes clear what the existing theory is and what their existing theories, how their existing research relates to existing theory. You cannot go into it with a blank slate. It's more or less impossible. Thank you.
So before I continue, I want to reveal a subtlety which will both be against me and both against my friend. When you dig deeply and really drill down as to what's going on, we will find that all methods of research actually contain elements of both deduction and induction. In deductive research, the decision as to which hypothesis to test often is a very inductive process. In deductive research, the choice of which literature to read and review is frequently influenced by the highly subjective choices the researcher decides to make. Once the results of a deductive research study have been revealed, they have to be interpreted. This is the highly inductive process. In inductive research, there's a great deal of deduction, because to make the transition from low-level descriptive substantive coding to a higher-level theoretical explanation, the data has to be broken down, has to be categorized. Well, the researcher has to decide what is a category, what is not a category. That is deduction. So there is a subtlety going on here. In all methods of research, it's peppered with both. Let me continue back to the debate. Inductive research can happen, does happen. I did do my PhD with a blank sheet of paper. I still got a PhD. Empirically grounded but modifiable robust propositions or hypothesis is yielded, but you end up with a hypothesis, with a robust hypothesis. That's the object. Any kind of data can be used with inductive research. It has the potential to deliver formal theory, which is an integrated set of hypotheses using a technique borrowed from mathematics called latent pattern analysis. So, why is the inductive research approach more appropriate in the management research? There are 4 things. Number 1, it reduces the disjuncture between academics and manager practitioners. If you get close to managers, away from other academics, they're not too impressed usually by the research which is yielded, because they don't recognize it. Secondly, Inductive research reveals the perspectives of those being researched, not what happens to be the buzzword in whatever field of academic you are living in. Thirdly, inductive research is free of preconceptions embedded within the interests of the professional research community. In another incarnation, I used to work in the hotel business. And one of the characteristics of the hotel business is a lot of its labor force is very flexible. There's a high level of labor turnover. People are coming, people are going. And this, for generations, has upset, annoyed, and angered a lot of human relations academics, because this is bad, because very expensive, people coming, people going. Hoteliers love it, because it means they don't have to bother hiring people. They just grab the next person that comes in the door, and as long as they hold on to the good people, the bad people leave anyway. So the final point is inductive research is able to capture the authentic nature of managerial work, not some assumed hypothesis which is firmly lodged in the brain of the academic community. Thank you for your attention. You know how to vote.
Thank you very much, Andy. Now let's vote. First motion, data before theory. Who supports that motion? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Theory before data. 1, 2, 3. Quite a lot, so I just lost the count. Those who don't know or undecided? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 persons. So we have the winner, theory before data. Let's vote on data before theory. But as Andy said, both induction and deduction has a bit of both. So let me thank both speakers for nice debates. For some time I just was in the room, so the debate heated quite a lot, so I almost want to come back and sit in the middle, but it was a nice debate, so thank you very much. And hope you can take this further with you, and now we'll have a coffee break, guys, and then we'll continue with our class. Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you.